Civilization depends on writing. Without writing, we have no way to retain important facts, figures, no way to archive documents, no way to prove ownership. It is true that the Homeric bards could remember thousands and thousands of lines of poetry and recite them night after night with great accuracy. But I can barely remember where I put my car keys. So, definitely writing is something that propelled civilization light years ahead. All literature begins with writing. It's artistic writing, isn't it? And so it's worth studying the beginning of writing. Where did it come from? Who made it? And how did it go? Basically, it's very interesting. Basically, scholars agree these days that two civilizations developed writing independently, although much spread out in time. Those were the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia and, believe it or not, the Meso-American Native Americans, the Olmecs, later leading to the Mayans. The ancient Sumerians developed their writing around 3400 to 3300 BC. So over 3,000 years before the Common Era. Now, there is some debate about it, however. For the longest time, everyone thought that Egypt was the first to develop writing. Well, not so. In fact, there is a great debate going on right now about whether Egypt didn't get some of their writing knowledge from the Mesopotamians, at least from the Sumerians, at least be inspired by the Sumerians. It's not that far away, and they have boats, Also, China. China developed some writing, very beautiful writing, around 1200 BC. But if you remember, we had the Silk Road that is a road, a trail where people would take a long trek from Europe to China and Japan, and in doing so, the culture spread that way. So, believe it or not, Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, and China were connected in that way. However, the Mesoamericans were not connected. That's why they say, well, we're pretty sure that Egypt and China was at least somewhat influenced by the Sumerians, but the Mesoamericans, the Mayans, the Oltecs, they were not. So let's look at some of this writing and see how they developed it. First, we'll talk about cuneiform. This is the writing of the ancient Sumerians. And you can see here, I have this map up on the screen. This is the Persian Gulf down here to the right. And then all this area here has been termed, it's between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, it's been termed the cradle of civilization, and for obvious reasons. This is where the first writing was developed. Now, it's called cuneiform, and it went through many phases. It started off much like this. The image I have on the screen here is of a more pictographic type of cuneiform. This is one of the earliest examples. You can see that the images there are pictographs. They actually are images, icons if you will. They actually represent the object that they depict. So the form of it, so this is a hand, foot, Now that had a meaning beyond the actual object, but they don't represent consonants. It's not a language in that way. However, cuneiform developed first to depict numbers, and then finally to depict an entire language that with vowel sounds and everything else you can think of. Now, it started off as just little clay tokens. See, the ancient Sumerians needed some way to keep track of their commodities. how many bushels of wheat they have, how much barley, etc. And so what they would use is clay tokens, and those tokens were meant to represent certain amounts. Well, they graduated from that to the pictographic variety, and then to the wedge variety, and that's what cuneiform means, is wedge shaped. You use a stylus to press these little wedges into a wet sheet of clay. Now, I love this tablet here. It's quite hilarious. It is one of the very earliest ones, and it is a paycheck someone received, and it's payable in beer. So you take this to the local pub, I assume, and this allows you a certain portion of beer. So right from the very beginning of civilization, it was just the same as it is now. Everybody was trying to figure out how to pay for beer. But eventually, cuneiform developed into this full language. Here you can see these entire clay tablets, and it really could record any kind of information they needed. We have a alphabet here. Now, the scholarship that it took to decipher the cuneiform language was intense, and it took a long time, but they finally did it. And so we even have an alphabet now, and it's not this simple. It's not just that, but you get the point. Now, one of the greatest treasures that we have is this tablet here. This is one of 14 tablets that were dug out of the sand in the ruins of an ancient library south of Iraq and over there in the Persian Gulf area. Now, this is, and the other tablets it came with, it depicts the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the very, 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 very first stories of humanity. It's a heroic tale. It follows the hero's journey pretty well. And really, above all, it is a creation story. So it's interesting because you want to go back to the very beginning of humanity and see what they're thinking about. So it's almost like humans woke up into this life thinking about beer first, and the second thing was how did this happen? How did we get here? Who made all this stuff? So anyway, this is one of the tablets, and on this particular tablet is recorded the story of the flood, and it's basically what you've heard of in the Hebrew Bible. It's the flood that was enacted upon the earth to kind of cleanse it. But it is interesting because the Gilgamesh flood follows the Hebrew Bible's flood so precisely that scholars are pretty doggone sure now that the Epic of Gilgamesh, this tablet, was the inspiration for the Hebrew story of the flood. I mean, it's all the way down to Noah with the bird flying off. Well, in this, he sends, in the Sumerian version, he sends 3 birds, one doesn't come back. I mean, it's word for word in the same order. Now the next for the longest time, everyone would say that the Egyptian language was the oldest. But before we do that, I want to show you some ancient Chinese. Now, this is a long way away, China, but like I told you before, they were connected by the Silk Road and other means. So China developed their language in 1200 BC. So you're talking a good almost 1500 years after the ancient Sumerians in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But it's different. It is different. It's not pictographic. And you can see here some examples. But let's talk about hieroglyphics, the Egyptian hieroglyphics. So deciphering hieroglyphics was also a very, very monumental academic task. And the real breakthrough came with this stone. Napoleon's troops, while they invaded Egypt, they unearthed this stone. And basically it's the key to the language of the Egyptian hieroglyphics. On the top here is the ancient form of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Here is a more modern form of Egyptian hieroglyphics, and here is ancient Greek. So basically it is the same same royal decree written in 3 different languages. So from that we knew the Greek, and that means we could decipher the rest. It's amazing. So here is what you've seen a million times, but I bet you've never really stopped to consider what it is. And I know the ancient aliens folks are going to say, yes, this is an airplane or a helicopter or whatever. Okay, all right. But here it is. The Egyptian language is very complex. Very complex. It is phonetic, and phonetic means that it sounds like, it is a word that is supposed to sound like a certain sound, as opposed to logograms, which are symbols that signify the actual object of which they are an image. So if it's a duck, then they're trying to tell you, they want you to say duck. Well, the Egyptian hieroglyphic script has all of that stuff all at once, and it also has sort of subtext. It has things that are inferred, and just they say it's very, very interesting. It's a very interesting language. It's almost an art rather than how we have so many rules in our language. But here you see there's all the different little symbols. But look, wait now. These symbols start to recur. See, there's the same ones there. Yeah, you start looking, and really, there's not all that many of them. So, yeah, it's true. We have an alphabet. There are in the Egyptian hieroglyphics, they have 24 what are called unilateral symbols, and that's like our alphabet. A unilateral symbol stands for a single consonant. A single consonant. But they have other things too. Here we have close-up of it. Here's one of their beautiful manuscripts. And I know if you see this representation, it is a cartouche. And inside the cartouche is always the last name of a pharaoh is always enclosed in a cartouche. And you can see here, though, you have the Egyptian hieroglyphics there in vertical rows now. And then, of course, this is just the art depicting a religious or a royal scene. But this is the writing here. Now, some of the symbols actually are supposed to depict the animal. Some of them are supposed to depict a sound. It's beautiful. So here's what we have worked out as for the 24 unilateral sounds. They stand for consonant sounds. So you can see there's the bird, the foot, there's A, B, C, and you can see it goes down like that. And of course it's not just that simple, but these are the sounds that this symbol is wanting you to make. It's just like our alphabet, only these are pictures. So most people think that Egyptian hieroglyphics is wholly pictographic, meaning, these are the objects they want you to think of. Not so. But sometimes it is. Sometimes a duck is a duck. Sometimes it's not. Here's another example of their alphabet and the sounds they want you to make. Now here is a more complex version of it. What I just showed you were hieroglyphs that represent a single consonant. In the middle here are hieroglyphics that represent 2 consonants, and you can see the 2 consonants there, like a duck. All right, and down here's the 3 consonant ones. These are the different cartouches. So like if you're Ramses the Third, this would be your cartouche. Cleopatra's down here. Oh yeah, buddy. All right, here's the Rosetta Stone again. Moving on, the final language I want to cover today is the Meso-American languages. So I'm fascinated by this because it developed much later, 300 BC, as opposed to 3400 BC. We traveled the Silk Road, but we did not come across the Atlantic. So the Mesoamerican Olmecs and Zapotecs, and then later the Mayans and Aztecs, they developed independently. And so this is the language that they derived, and it is very different, very different. This is some of the earliest examples right here. This is from the Olmec language, and the Olmecs were some of the very first inhabitants of South and Central America. Yeah, so the language leads to the mature form here, which is Mayan, and it's the Mayan hieroglyphic language. Very, very different, but you can see it's pictographic. There are images there, and those images are meant to represent, just like the Egyptians, both sounds and actual nouns or concepts. One thing I want to tell you that's a real tragedy. The Mayans had many, many, many books. They called them codices, and they were collected by the Spanish religious folks that came over and tried to convert the Indians, by the missionaries. They were collected, and long story short, the bishop decided one day that he would, just to make sure that they don't go back to their infidel ways, he lit a bonfire and threw all of those manuscripts, all of those codices on that fire. What a tragedy. This is one of the last remaining codices, and it's called the Dresden Codex. And it's priceless. It's in Dresden, Germany. Some more examples. So now you can see here some of the glyphs. So this is meant to be a snake, and you have the sun here. And these are spread out in such a way as to form a fully functioning language. More codices. Here you have a close-up of the specific glyphs, some of them. And it all leads to this beautiful image here, which is the Mayan Astro calendar. Many people attribute it to the Aztecs, and they did use this, but really it was derived from the Mayans. And we have an earlier version here, and a bit different version here. But you can see all of the glyphs around the edges here. Another key. So there you go. Writing was developed in 2 places in the world independently, and maybe more, maybe China, maybe Egypt. But it's a wonderful thing to have, because now we have great literature to study and appreciate.